Hello and welcome to my weekly podcast, Through the Bible in 10 Years. Today we're going to finish up Hebrews chapter 11. So last week we started the faith chapter, the Hall of Faith, dun, 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 dun. We're going to, Lord willing, next week launch into Hebrews 12, which kind of gives us a sense of what this chapter is all about. Hebrews 12:1, therefore being surrounded by such a cloud of witnesses, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our course, and laying aside every weight. You know that we're good runners. So chapter 11 is basically all of the people in the stands who are cheering us on. They've run this race before. Steve Green used to have a song, "Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful," and that's what they're saying to us. They have been found faithful, and so we need to keep going too. The lead into chapter 11 is chapter 10, which basically says, okay, you guys have done this before. You've faced persecution before. You've faced hard times before. We're not like people who shrink back. We don't stop. We finish the race. And so I think there are three main takeaways from the first part of chapter Hebrews 11 that I want to remind you as we launch into the last part of the chapter. The first verse, of course, says, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. We see two themes. One of the themes is things not seen. The promises of God often aren't seen, right? Our faith is as it were, the proof or the evidence of them. We can't see them right now. Noah didn't see water. He didn't see the flood. Years and years and years before it came. His faith was the proof now of that. And so the author of Hebrews is telling its audience, you may not see the things that God has promised yet. It may look bad down here on the earthly plane, but God wins in the end, like Revelation. God wins. God will win. It may not look like God's winning right now. We may not understand what is going on, but God will win in the end. We don't have to worry about it. God will keep his promises. So one of the themes that is established in the first part of this chapter is having faith when we don't see it. When we don't see it. A second theme is faithfulness. Because, of course, the word faith has several different nuances. It can mean head belief. It can mean a heart trust. It can also mean a faithfulness that we do with our feet. Heart, hands, feet, head, heart, hands. I don't know if you've ever heard that analogy. Faith of the head is belief. Faith of the heart is trust and confidence. And faith of the hands is faithfulness. And so that idea of faithfulness. Another theme in the first part is the idea that we're aliens and strangers in the land right now. This is not our home. This earth is not our homeland. This earth is not our country. We are looking for a heavenly country, a heavenly homeland, like Abraham, who went out to a land that he would later inherit, but that he was an alien and stranger in the land while he was alive. And so we will inherit the new earth when Jesus returns, but the new earth is not yet. We are aliens and stranger in the land that is ours by promise. And that's where we are when we go into verse 20, where we move on from Abraham as an example of faith. Abraham is the biggest chunk so far of faith example. We see Noah, we see Enoch, we see Abel, and so forth. We see those in the first part of the chapter. Now we're going to move on with Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. And if you're watching the video version, I have interlinearbible.org up. So let's begin with verse 20. By faith also concerning things coming, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau. Things coming. You see this? Faith is the substance of things hoped for. They're not here yet. These things haven't been fulfilled yet. Christ hasn't come back yet. The new heavens and the new earth hasn't happened yet. These are things that are coming. We don't see them right now, but we have faith in things that are coming. Like Isaac had faith in things that were coming, and he blessed Jacob and Esau with that faith, even though Jacob died, or even though Isaac died before he could see it. Verse 21, by faith Jacob dying, each of the sons of Joseph blessed, and he worshipped on the top of his staff. Again, same theme. Faith is the substance of things hoped for. Jacob is going to die before it happens, but he believes it, even though he can't see it. And he blesses the sons of Jacob, and he worships on his staff. Worships the God who's going to bring all these things to pass. Verse 22, by faith Joseph, when dying, concerning the Exodus, he remembered concerning the exodus of the sons of Israel, and concerning his bones he gave instructions. Again, notice that all three of these examples are about to die. And the audience may be about to die. That may be part of what they're afraid of, afraid that they're about to die. But the author of Hebrews basically says, be like Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, who, even though they were about to die, and even though they died before the promises came to pass, they believed in them. So in this case, Joseph said, take my bones back to bury with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, because I believe that you're going to come out of Egypt one day. Faith is a substance of things hoped for. Then with verse 23, we get to Moses. So Abraham had a big chunk, and now Moses is going to have a big chunk. Abraham and Moses get the two big chunks. All these others are minor characters. The main characters are Abraham and Moses in this chapter. And of course, that makes sense given the way Israel's understood the history of their people. Abraham is the founding father of the people, and then Moses establishes the law of the people. Okay, verse 23. By faith Moses, having been born, was hidden 3 months by his parents, because they saw that he was a beautiful child, and they did not fear the edict of the king. Now, I think the edict of the king here is probably a proxy for the Roman emperor. Maybe not. Maybe I'm overreading it. Ken, you're overreading it. But if you ask if the audience is in Rome, which we don't know for sure, but that's a plurality of voices in the academic community. If the audience is in Rome, then if they say don't fear the edict of the king, who is the Roman Church going to think of? Well, they're going to think of the Roman emperor. At this time, we don't know who it was. Some scholars have argued that the Roman emperor might be Nero. I would probably go with Vespasian as the Roman emperor at this time. Again, my tendency is to date Hebrews to around 70, 71, 72, somewhere in there, after Titus, who would become the next emperor, had brought the spoils back from the destruction of Jerusalem. They would have paraded the elite of Jerusalem through the city and then killed them. There's an arch of Titus that you can see even today there in Rome. But Moses' parents had faith. They did not fear the edict of the king. They were willing to suffer under the authorities of that day because they believed that God would be faithful to his promises. Verse 24, by faith Moses, having become large, having become great, he denied to be called a son of Pharaoh's daughter. He rather, verse 25, having chosen to suffer affliction with the people of God, than the temporary enjoyment, rather than to have the temporary enjoyment of sin. I like the way the King James Version words this, the pleasures of sin for a season. Sin can be pleasurable for a season, but why I personally don't think that God has laid down sins because he's wanting to see whether I'm drawing a line here, don't step across it. There's no reason other than to see whether you'll obey me. I think that's probably not the primary way that God operates. There may be times when God does that, when he's looking for are we going to ultimately obey him or not. It's possible. I'm not going to say he doesn't with Adam and Eve. It sure seems like that kind of a system was set up. But I think by and large, God has reasons for the things that he commands us. I actually consider it somewhat morally immature to think of rules as it's just the rules. We're just following the rules, and the rules have no particular meaning to them at all. It's just you've got to follow the rules. I think for the most part, in the overwhelming majority of cases, there are reasons why God has made the commands that he has. It's for our benefit. It's for us. And so there may be momentary pleasures of sin for a season. I know, for example, if someone struggles with, say, diabetes, it can be pleasurable to eat a lot of starch. Let's say you heap up a plate full of mashed potatoes, or a baguette, eat a whole baguette. There's a pleasure to that, but you're going to pay for it because your body can't handle the carbohydrates, and so you're going to pay for it eventually. And sin is like that. Sin is enjoyable in the moment, but man, do you pay for it. I was watching Downton Abbey. Sometimes my wife will put on Downton Abbey, and then she immediately goes to sleep. Unfortunately, it keeps me up watching it. There was an episode, I don't think I'd ever seen this episode before, where someone in the house, he gets drunk and he sleeps with someone he shouldn't sleep with, and it almost wrecks him. In the show, he is saved by someone who has greater wisdom than he does. But the pleasure of that sin for a season almost ruined him. And that's the way sin is. Sin feels good in the moment, but then you pay for it, and you often pay for it a long time, sometimes the rest of your life. And so, but Moses, the example here, Moses chose to suffer affliction with the people of God rather than the temporary enjoyment of sin. Why? Because he believed. Verse 26, because having considered it to be greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, the reproach of the Christ to be of greater wealth than the pleasures of sin for a season. Now, did Moses know about Jesus? I don't think he did. This is a blurring together of what the author is saying to the audience. Moses is obeying God, which of course includes Jesus. I don't think Moses knew about Jesus. So this is putting it in words that make it very relevant to the audience. Moses chose to endure the reproach of serving God rather than have the treasures of Egypt, which is momentary. And that's the same as the audience of Hebrews, which needs, the author is saying, you need to choose the reproach of Christ. You need to choose the reproach of the Christ, just like Moses chose that reproach, because it's has greater reward than the treasures of Egypt. You may not see it now, but faith is the substance of things hoped for. Faith is the evidence of things not seen. For he was looking toward the reward. Again, he was looking for what he knew would happen eventually. Now, you may say, I don't see that in the Exodus text. Remember, this is ancient Jewish exegesis. That's not important. They're not exegeting the Old Testament passage. They're dancing with the Spirit and the biblical text. And there's a blurring together of what's good for the audience and what the audience needs to hear, the inspired word for the audience, and what the biblical text said in the past. So don't expect it to line up exactly. It doesn't have to. That's not the way ancient Jewish exegesis worked. They're dancing in the Spirit with the text. And we get the point, right? We get the point that Moses was looking to the reward. That is, you all are looking to the reward, and you need to keep going, even though there may be the temptation to give in and enjoy your Roman citizenship, for example. You know, it's like, why would I throw away my Roman citizenship? I'm so privileged. I have so many things that are mine that other people don't have. But Moses, even though he was in a place of privilege, was willing to give up that privilege because he looked to the one who rewards, which is Christ, which is God. Verse 27, by faith he left Egypt, not having feared the anger of the king. Again, this is difficult. This is one of those passages where, if he didn't fear the anger of the king, why wouldn't he have stopped? Why would he have fled Egypt if he didn't fear? But again, we have to consider that there's a blurring going on here of the Moses story with the story of the audience. And again, who is the king? The king is almost certainly Pharaoh. Almost certainly the emperor. And so the author of Hebrews is basically saying, if you need to leave Rome, if you need to leave, and of course, if you need to leave Jerusalem, even these blurring of two cities, that earthly cities that someone might count on, that they need to look more to the heavenly Jerusalem, to the heavenly city. You know, if you get kicked out, if you get exiled from Rome, if you get expelled from the city of Rome, and of course the Jewish Christians were expelled from the city of Rome in 49 AD, probably. Don't be like Moses, who did not fear the anger of the king. He left Egypt, for he was persevered as seeing that which is invisible. Faith is the substance of things, the evidence of things not seen. So you may not see the promise yet, but you need to orient yourself around the unseen, or orient yourself around the heavenly king, not around the earthly king. Don't fear the wrath of the emperor. Don't fear the wrath of the Romans, but look to the king who is unseen. And if you get exiled, if you get kicked out, don't fear the wrath of the king. Verse 28, by faith he made the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, not in order that the one destroying might not touch the firstborn sons of them. So this fleeing earlier must refer to him fleeing to Midian when he killed another Egyptian and he fled. It's a weird verse because it doesn't look like the text in Exodus really says that he left not fearing the wrath of the king. But again, don't think of this as purely about the text of Exodus. This is dancing with the text of Exodus. It's dancing with the Spirit with the text of Exodus. Okay, he made the Passover so that the destroying angel might not touch the firstborn sons of Israel. And in the same sense, we are the firstborn children of God. And even though there may be earthly punishment right now, we will not ultimately be destroyed. The judgment, when the final judgment comes, it will not touch us because we are the firstborn children of God. Verse 29, by faith they passed through the Red Sea as through dry ground, which the Egyptians, having made that same trip, they were swallowed up. And so this is a case, one of the things we'll see at the close of this chapter is that sometimes God does rescue us in this life. Sometimes he doesn't rescue us in this life. But here's an example of God rescuing the children of Israel even in this life. That if the Egyptians here are a proxy for the Romans, that who knows, perhaps the Lord will deliver you from Roman vengeance on the people of Israel for the Jewish war, if that's what's going on in the background of this. Verse 30, by faith the walls of Jericho fell, having been circled 7 days. Sometimes God does bring victory in this life. Sometimes he doesn't, but sometimes he does, and he did with Joshua and the walls of Jericho. Okay, verse 31, we're in Jericho. By faith, Rahab, the prostitute, did not perish with those who disobeyed, having received the spies with peace. So, the city of Rome may be destroyed like Jericho someday, but you will survive eternally because you are someone who obeys, not someone who disobeys. And of course, in chapter 3, we saw that there were many Israelites who disobeyed, and their corpses died in the desert as well. And the audience shouldn't be like those. The audience should be like those who continue on to inherit the promises. So with verse 32, we enter the final part of the chapter. And this is kind of a miscellaneous. The author uses a kind of rhetorical tool where he mentions people without telling their stories. Verse 32, and what still will I say? For the time will fail me to go on to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, and David, and Samuel, and the prophets. So he mentions them. He says, I'm not going to mention them, but he does kind of mention them. But he doesn't tell their full stories. This is a rhetorical tool. By the way, the word here, time will fail me to go on to tell, or time will fail me to tell. The to tell here in Greek is a participle, and it modifies the word me. For time will fail me. Now, when you modify the word modify, you may not know that word, but when you modify a word like me in Greek, you have to specify the gender and the number. So time will fail me to tell. And the going to tell here is masculine singular. Why is that important? Well, it's significant because it indicates that the author is referring to himself as masculine singular. To me, this verse, it's a very tiny thing here, but the fact that the author identifies grammatically himself, he identifies me with masculine singular, pretty much ends the question of whether Priscilla was the author of Hebrews. Now, I have no problem in theory, with the idea of Priscilla authoring Hebrews. In fact, I'd be delighted if Priscilla was the author of Hebrews. And there are several books out. Ruth Hopkins. There are some books that create scenarios. Well, could she be pretending to be a man? Because it wouldn't be accepted if they knew it was her. I mean, those are fanciful theories. They're ingenious theories, but honestly, what's important is what does it actually mean? What is true? And I just think we have to be pretty honest here. The author identifies as a masculine singular. The author of Hebrews is a guy. Again, I say that as somebody who's incredibly pro-women in ministry. But what I don't like is cooking the books. I grew up, I believe, in eisegesis land, where we basically make the Bible, we say, this is the conundrum, we say that the Bible is inerrant and without and infallible and the ultimate authority, but then we don't let it say what it says. See the trick here? I hope I can communicate this here. We say it's the ultimate authority, and then we say, well, it says what I think it says. In other words, we make ourselves the ultimate authority. We don't actually listen to the biblical text and let it say what it says. That if the biblical text says, no, it's okay to read texts spiritually. Well, we don't do that. It's a kind of game we play where we say, you must, let me mention a sensitive one. You must listen to Genesis, but I'm going to tell you what Genesis really means. That kind of thing here. So I don't want to get into hermeneutics too much here. All I want to say is this is a masculine singular participle. The author identifies as masculine singular. The author's a guy. Now, are there other possibilities? Yes, but they're far-fetched. I'm interested in what's most probably true. Not what's possible to argue from the text, but what's probable to argue from the text. So I'm not going to say any more. I'm simply going to say that I refer to the author as a he because it seems very likely that the author is a he. If the author had been Priscilla, excellent. That would have been wonderful. But that's not what happened in this particular case, I don't think. So time will leave me to go on to tell about Gideon. These are stories from Judges. So the author's just going kind of through the biblical text, right? He's just done Joshua references. Now he's in Judges references. Then he goes into Samuel references. David and Samuel and the prophets. Verse 33. Now, what did those people do? Who, through faith, they conquered kingdoms. They worked justice. They worked righteousness. Tekaiosune. They obtained promises. They shut the mouths of lions. There's Daniel there. They quenched the power of fire. Daniel again. They escaped the mouths of the sword. They acquired strength out of weakness. They became mighty in war. They put to flight armies of foreigners. Women received back from the resurrection of the dead. Received the dead back their dead back in resurrection. Others were tortured, not having accepted redemption, but they might, in order that they might obtain a better resurrection. Again, this reminds us of something I said a little earlier, and that is that sometimes the Lord delivers us and we win the battle, and sometimes the Lord doesn't deliver us. So some women receive their dead back, as in the woman in is it Kings that is it Elisha that brings back a child from the dead? So some received the dead back, but others waited for a different resurrection, a better resurrection. So the bottom line is sometimes the Lord will bring us through, sometimes the Lord won't bring us through. So some did not accept release or redemption, looking to a better resurrection. Verse 36. Others received the trial of mockings and scourgings, and still others of chains and imprisonment. Verse 37, they were stoned. They were sawed in two. There's a tradition that Isaiah died by sawing in two. By the sword of slaughter, they were killed. They wandered in sheepskins and goats, being destitute. I wonder if that's John the Baptist. Being oppressed, being mistreated. Verse 38, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering in deserts, Elijah maybe here some, in mountains and caves, and holes of the earth. Verse 39. So again, this is the heroes of faith. We're seeing the picture on the wall of these great heroes who died in faith. Verse 39, these all, having witnessed through faith, did not receive the promise. Remember last week I said that there are bookends in this chapter. It says, by faith they received a good report, back in verse 2, I think it is. Well, here is the other bookend. These all, having been witnessed through their faith. So chapter 11 does go together as a unit, even though it's part of a broader train of thought that includes chapter 10 and chapter 12. So sometimes you're not going to get the promise now. Sometimes you're going to die before the promise comes to pass. And these all did. They all died not having received the promise. Verse 40, God having planned ahead of time something better for us, so that not apart from us they should be made perfect. So now that Jesus has died for our sins, we can all be perfected. They can now get the rain check of perfection, and we can get it now real time because Christ has died for sins. We're in them. We're part of that great hall of faith, and we're going to inherit the promises just like them. We're the last of the group, the last of the race. You know, everybody else has finished the race already. We are now finishing the race too, and the awards ceremony is not going to start until after we are done with the race, and then we're all going to get the prize. And I've mentioned earlier in the podcast of Hebrews that to be made perfect is to be cleansed in the thought world of Hebrews. We're going to get our sins cleansed all together as one because of the death of Jesus Christ. Well, that's the end of chapter 11. Chapter 12, as I said, goes on to say, therefore, surrounded by this great cloud of witnesses, let us run with patience the race that is set before us. Well, Hebrews 11, what a spectacular chapter, the faith chapter of the New Testament. And so, Lord willing, next week we'll go on to Hebrews 12, and the week after that we'll finish the book of Hebrews through the Bible in 10 years.